Thank you, Cheryl. That was for me this morning. I don't know about you. You know, if every single person on the planet made that their intention to be humble and kind, we would live in a different world, wouldn't we? You know, so much of doing the right thing kind of comes from that place of humility and kindness. So thank you for setting up my talk so perfectly. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I was talking to her in my office and said, honey, when are you going to cut a CD? So I think we need to keep putting that pressure on. So anyway, so today we enter the month of June. And we have a new theme for the month, and it is accountability. And so I don't know about you, but I really needed to refresh myself on the definition of that word. And so I Googled it, and the definition I found that makes the most sense to me is this one. It says accountability is the obligation of an individual to account for one's actions and to accept responsibility for them. So throughout this month, we're going to have the opportunity to look at this thing called life that belongs to each of us individually and explore the idea that whatever we do or don't do is kind of on us, right? We have responsibility for our lives, and accountability is what it's all about. So I often say that we don't necessarily get to choose exactly what happens to us in our life, but we do always get to choose our response to it or our reaction to it. Don't you think that's true? That you're kind of going along your life, ho-de-do-de-do, and something unexpected happens. It could be a big global unexpected thing or a tiny little conversation with someone out of the blue, but something unexpected happens and we must respond and react. And how we handle such things really exposes who we think we are on a deeper level. So let's talk about that responsibility. You break that word down, it's the ability to respond. And responsibility is such a key indicator of the quality of our life. So I invite you to think for a second, bring to mind a person who you admire, someone you look up to, someone whose life you might want to emulate. Think about that person. Now think about that person's ability to respond to things, the unexpected news or a sudden change or a new challenge. Because chances are, one of the things that you admire about them is their ability to handle the challenging and unexpected twists and turns of life. And we all have twists and turns in our lives, but people who respond well seem to live more fulfilling lives. They seem to move about in their lives with a sense of poise, and what I like to call spiritual poise. So this morning I really want to talk with you about, I kind of broke it down into 3 steps. A 3-step process for developing a greater ability to respond or a higher level of responsibility. And those 3 steps are lose, seek, and find. And I promise I'll explain a little better as we go along. So what do you think drives our response in any given situation? Our thoughts. Whatever we think about what just happened will dictate our choices and our actions in response to whatever it is that just happened. Whatever story we tell ourselves about the other people involved in whatever just happened will determine our actions towards them and our response and our feelings about them. Most of the time, if you're like me, you have an initial response or an initial impulse to react. And a lot of times that initial something doesn't come from a place that I really want to expose to the whole world, right? And that initial response comes from the story that I've had running underneath the surface of my life, probably for years, right? And here's what I know. It doesn't really matter if social conditioning causes us to kind of alter our outward response. It's what's going on in our minds that's really creative, that really creates the quality of our lives. So the first step is to lose the story. Lose the story. So we really have to figure out what the facts are that just happened and separate them out from the story that we're telling ourselves about the facts. Because it's the story that's the root of our response, not necessarily the facts. So in ministerial school, we were taught this little phrase called MSUing. And MSU means to make stuff up. So when something happens, there's what happened, and then there's all the MSU stuff, right? That we make up about it. And the ability to respond in a more impactful and empowered way depends on the story that we're telling ourselves. So if we can tell ourselves a better story and stop making stuff up, we're going to be better. So we've got to lose the story. So let me give you a little example from my own life. You know, I like to tell stories about my own life. Because they're just more real. I can understand them better because I did it. So when I was a little girl, I loved my grandmother. I loved my grandmother. We called her Nana. And my brothers and I actually all just adored my grandmother, especially when we were really small. Because my grandma was the kind of grandma that would like break the rules and let you do things that our parents would not necessarily be happy with. We got to stay up a little later, eat things that we really wouldn't get to eat at home, that kind of thing. She made you feel super special, especially when you got to be one-on-one with her. Because there were several grandchildren. But when you're the one that's with her and you're the only one, it's really a lot of fun. So one summer, I was 10, because I know what house we lived in. I was 10, and my grandmother needed to take some stuff to my aunt in Oklahoma. She lived in Denver. My aunt lived in Oklahoma, and we were about 80 miles along the highway between my grandmother and my aunt. And so she asked me, hey, would you like to go on this road trip with me? Would I like to go on a road trip? Yes. Yes, with my grandmother one-on-one. Are you kidding? Yes. So, and believe it or not, my parents agreed to let me go. And so the plan was that she would pick me up on one particular Friday afternoon, and we would drive to Oklahoma, drop the stuff off, and come back. So when that day came, I packed my little suitcase. I was so excited, and I was probably nanny boo-booing my brothers because I got to go and they didn't. And I was so excited, I couldn't even wait inside the house. I needed to wait out on the porch with my suitcase so I could see the driveway and see the road, and I was really excited about that. So I sat there and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited. And my brother's jealousy started turning to teasing. Like, hey, you thought you were going, right? So, I don't know. You know, back then, I think a long-distance call cost $500 a minute or something. But in our house, you didn't call long distance. And 80 miles was long distance, and that was way too much money to spend to find out why my grandmother wasn't there. So I sat and I waited. So hours went by. And finally, my father lost patience with this whole child sitting out on his front steps. So he makes me come inside and suck it up and let's have dinner. So finally, later that night, my mom, I guess the rates got cheaper. So, sorry, Mom. I know she's watching at some point. This is true. She finally called my grandmother, and it turns out they changed their minds. You know, somehow they changed their plans, but they forgot about the little 10-year-old girl waiting along the road. They just forgot. And so my mom, you know, my grandma didn't get me on the phone or apologize. I don't think my grandmother ever apologized. But anyway, that was it. That was it. So as you can imagine, I was devastated. I was embarrassed. And quite frankly, I was scarred for life, actually. Now, I know that this was just one example, and I'm sure there were many others, but when I was trying to uncover this story that I was telling myself, I kept coming back in my healing process to that particular event because it was so out of the ordinary and it was very telling. So I interpreted what happened through my 10-year-old filter. Okay, through my 10-year-old filter, I interpreted everything, and I began to tell myself stories. I told myself the story that I wasn't special and that my grandma didn't love me special. And I decided that I really had a hard time depending on adults and what they planned. And as a result, I no longer deeply, deeply trusted my grandmother's love. And I stopped taking other people at their word. I didn't feel special. I felt alone. I felt that I needed to protect myself. And I know that this one incident, combined with lots of other incidents, was a life lesson in the making. But it would take me decades to understand that. But as the years went on, I continued to run that story underneath the surface of my life, this unworthiness story. And I developed defense mechanisms that would prevent me from ever feeling that pain again. Like I would not get excited about things that were planned until I was likely in the car. And then something could happen, But I would react to disappointments. People naturally have to change things, but I would react with more emotionality than the people around me would expect. And so I sort of walled myself off. And I closed a big part of my heart. Why did I do that? I did that because I continued to tell myself the story. The story of I'm forgotten and alone. I get more attached than other people do. The power was in the story or the thoughts that I was having. And one of the ways that life works so beautifully is we keep getting opportunities to let go of the story. We keep drawing to ourselves similar circumstances, similar situations, so that we can choose differently. We can choose a different story. Now, I know that my example is not unique. Yeah, the details are mine, but I've come to understand that we all have experiences in our young lives that set our thinking in such a way that each one of us develops a story that we are unworthy, we are abandoned, or we are, bottom line, separate from everyone else, somehow uniquely separate. And the result is that we come from a place of defensiveness. And we push through life, defensively looking for the next thing that might hurt us or challenge us. We think we are alone, and that our survival depends on our ability to keep ourselves safe. I just think it's universal. I think it's universal. And I think that part of our life purpose is to heal these young childhood wounds, because these buttons are going to get pushed over and over again until we do. And this is where spirituality can help. And I think that's part of what brings us together in a community like this, or a teaching like this, because our souls are on this energetic path towards greater and greater oneness, a greater ability to cooperate with other beings. And since everyone's on that evolutionary path towards oneness, we are each healing to release the stories that hold us back from that oneness. We are practicing our ability to respond. Here's what Ernest Holmes, the founder of our philosophy, said about responsibility. He said, "When we are willing to lose a personal sense of responsibility, when we let go of the thought of isolation and claim a real unity with God, then we lose the personal and we find the universal." And he reminds us, but remember, as the greater always includes the lesser, so the universal always includes the personal. So what does he mean by that, letting go of the thought of isolation and claiming a unity with God? I believe that the universal wounding of childhood creates the false illusion of unworthiness and separation from God itself. Here in this place, we're learning to respond to life from a knowing of our oneness, a move towards that oneness. And great teachers throughout the ages have taught us the same thing. Until we truly understand the truth of our being and confront our human fears of rejection and separation, we will never be fulfilled. So once we lose the story that we're separate and alone, then we have to seek something. We have to seek the truth. And that's the second step. Lose the story, seek the truth. Master Teacher Jesus is quoted in the Gospel of Thomas, the non-canonized Gospel of Thomas, as having said this: "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Now, I think we can interpret that scripture in a lot of different ways, but using it for our example here this morning, if we do not bring forth and challenge the stories of isolation and separation that are within us, they will destroy us. They will destroy our opportunity for oneness and healing. But if we do bring them forth and heal them, they will be the very thing that saves us. Saves us from what? Saves us from pain. Saves us from being alone. And I really believe that is true. I really do. So after we challenge the story that runs our responses, we get to this second step of seeking the truth, seeking our true identity. And the truth is, you're a divine idea in the mind of God. You're a part of the whole. And claiming that powerfully absolutely changes your story. When we finally know that God is within us, and that God is within every other person that we are encountering along the way, every other person that we are encountering along the way is God itself in form. When we know that, there is nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. When we know that God lives life through us, we don't have to protect ourselves. God does not need to protect itself. Now, it's easy to sit here on a Sunday morning and know your God self and know your true identity. It's a completely different story to walk around your daily life and live from a knowing that you are a divine being, that you have that truth perspective, and to remember the truth at every turn. And I can tell you, I did not have a truth perspective when I'm crying my eyes out when my Nana didn't come get me. I didn't have that. And many, many, many other times along the way, I didn't have that truth perspective in dealing with disappointments and abandonment. I really felt like I had to be independent and that it was every woman for herself. So how did I find the truth? How did I learn to tell myself a different story at those times? I think we have to be willing to admit that something's got to change. And I think once we utter those words to ourselves, something has got to change. Our highest self, our soul, begins to draw to us opportunities to hear that truth, to learn that truth, to anchor in that. We'll hear a speaker, we'll read a book, we'll encounter a friend that has a different perspective. I believe that's how life works. And I found my way to a teaching like this that helps me stop my reactions to everything long enough to start exploring the thoughts that I was having. And over time, I had to be willing to shift the idea of myself as a fragile, easily wounded individual and know my true self, my empowered self, my identity as that divine idea in the mind of God. I had to figure out the truth. In other words, I had to get a better ability to respond. And I began to learn to respond to life's moments from a place of faith, from a deeper place of courage. I have this saying in my office, and it says, courage is a love affair with the unknown. Courage is a love affair with the unknown. And at this point in my life, with all the changes going on, I say that I'm having a hot, passionate love affair with the unknown. But we can have more courage and face the unknown more powerfully when we have that I am identity. Once we know with deep faith that God is in every single detail of your life, every relationship, every situation is unfolding for your betterment, then you have that true identity. So how do we demonstrate courageous responsibility? That's the title of the talk this morning, courageous responsibility. How do we respond from that position of our divinity and do the right thing? I think it is only our unhealed humanity that gets tangled up in circumstances and defensiveness and fearfulness and combativeness. That's what's going on, is when we're running into our unhealed stuff. When we have the internal dialogue going on about isolation and separation, it really shows up in how we treat others and, importantly, how we treat ourselves. And this is only truly healed when we remember that we're an activity of God. And as such, God is perfect, whole, and complete, and so are we. We experience it to the degree that we know it. And when we've remembered that basic spiritual truth of life, we can move on to the third step, which is to find something. And we find courageous love as our response. Courageous love is one of the options of responding to anything in life. So there's a story about this woman. She's an Episcopal priest, and she's got on the little clerical collar, which allows the world to know that she is in the ministry. And she's on the New York subway riding, and this homeless woman gets on. And the homeless woman sits down next to the priest and begins to talk to her. And immediately, the priest begins to think, okay, how much money is she going to ask me for? How much should I give her? What is the right thing to do in this situation? And she's running that in her mind. And the homeless woman is just, she's not asking for anything. She's just talking to the priest about God, about her spiritual life, about, life in general. And finally, when the homeless woman gets to her stop, she gets up to go, and she pulls out a subway token, and she hands it to the minister, and she said, I'm so sorry. This is all I have to give you, but I wanted you to have it. I'm so sorry. Thank you for this conversation. It's really been empowering to me. And she gets off the subway. And the woman just sits there. The priest just sits there, knowing that the whole time she was running her own story about what was going on instead of being fully present in the moment. The priest was unable to access the third step, which is to find courageous love and as your response. So how often do we get caught up in this internal story, and it gets in the way of our ability to be in the right now moment or to find the courageous love response that's available to us? I think we move through our lives like the priest, just constantly on the defense and constantly living from the past and the story that's running through our lives. We've got to know what's happening right now. And as a divine idea in the mind of God actually is available to us. And when we know that, we have access to that in every circumstances. Access to the perfect pattern that Ernest Holmes talks about. Ernest Holmes teaches that in every situation, in every relationship, in every circumstance, in every cell of your body, there's a perfect pattern waiting to come out. And that perfect pattern of the situation or the relationship or whatever is the one that reflects love, the one that reflects light, the one that reflects all of the God qualities. And as the divine idea in the mind of God, I have access to my part of that perfect pattern. That is always the right thing to do in every situation. The right response is always part of that perfect pattern. And so as we consider an event or an unexpected thing, we can access divine wisdom to guide our response. And when we come from a knowing of who we are, we can find the right comment. We can find the right action to take. We can find it with greater and greater ease. And what I know is when we come from that place and we are guided by divine wisdom, we don't need to care about what anyone else thinks about our response. We don't have to get caught up in that. And Ernest Holmes reminds reminds us, the criterion for any man as to what is right or wrong for him is not to be found in some other man's judgment. The criterion is this: does the thing I wish to do express more life, more happiness, more peace for myself, and at the same time do no harm to anyone? If it meets that criterion, it is right. More life, more happiness, more peace for myself and for others. So when we have this 3-step process going, we've lost our story, we know our divine truth, and we found the courageous love, the perfect pattern response. We are living with a high ability to respond. So you have the rest of your life to live, the whole rest of your life. So when you're moving about in your daily life, encountering something unexpected, whether it is that big global event or news story, or if it's just a simple conversation with your neighbor, ask yourself what the facts are versus what you're making up about it. Stop and ask. Find for a second, remember that you're a divine being, and then find that courageous love response. Ask yourself bigger questions. Instead of asking yourself, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to the world? Why is this happening? Instead of asking that, ask instead, how does Spirit show up through me in this moment? How can I be the light and love that is needed here? It doesn't take courage to show up as your highest self in any situation. It just takes knowing who you really are in everyday situations. Your quality of life depends on the quality of your relationships. We zipped into this magic suit, this human body. We came onto this physical plane to relate to each other, to relate to other beings. And our human stories interfere with the truth of our souls in wanting to make those connections. So if I go back to my example of my being abandoned, I still get opportunities in day-to-day life to practice this about that particular story. And thankfully, I'm able to respond with a little bit more courage and love as a 50-something-year-old instead of a 10-year-old. But I'll tell you a more recent story. Not too long ago, a few months ago actually, my friend Margot and I made a plan to go to the movies. You know how you make a plan with, I'm going to see this movie with this person, it's going to be great, and this is what we're going to do. And we're going to meet in the afternoon, and we're going to see this movie together. I was so excited. And so I get to the movie early, because I get to everywhere early, if you know me. And I got the big popcorn to share. It was going to be fun, and I probably had M&Ms in my pocket too, because that's just the way I am. And I waited, and I go into the theater, and I pick the perfect seats, and I have the popcorn, and no Margot. And so I send a text and say, I'm in the theater, got the popcorn, just come on in, we're ready, let's go, whatever. Then the previews roll, all that. Now the movie starts, and I'm beginning to have that sinking feeling, right? No text, no Margot, no nothing. So I sit there, and that would be a perfect trigger for me to have that same feeling of, I got more excited about this than she did, she doesn't love me, I'm abandoned, all of that stuff. And so I kind of dropped into spiritual practice, and I affirmed, I'll know what I need to know when I need to know it. I affirm that all is well, and I affirm that Margot is in her right and perfect place, and so am I, with all of this popcorn. And so I watched the movie, I ate my M&Ms, I ate the popcorn, it was a great afternoon, and it turns out she was in a yoga class, she didn't have her phone on her, she had forgotten completely about the movie. And now I can tease her mercilessly, and I do. Every time we make a plan. Are you sure? Yeah. So this is a practice that can change your life. If I had had a response towards Margot, I might never see a movie with her again. I may ruin, that whole situation may ruin that friendship. But I had the opportunity to affirm that all was well, and now our friendship's actually even better because of it, because we have this little laugh going on now. but it can change your life, because those little moments are where the quality of your life shows up. So I'll close. Eleanor Roosevelt sums it up perfectly when she said this: one's philosophy is not best expressed in words. It is best expressed in the choices one makes. And the choices we make are ultimately our responsibility. May you always have the highest ability to respond to whatever life brings you. Choose love, and so it is. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Alt, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision, and that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.